Hey everybody, welcome back to RSAC, the TechStrong coverage from TechStrong TV. I'm Mitch Ashley, Futurum, leading the analyst practice for application development, DevOps, application security, all kinds of good stuff. I'm joined by what I would call a good friend. Brian and I have gotten to know each other for a long time, talking usually at these kind of events.
Yeah.
Most of the time about half the time we're on camera.
Like we just did this, didn't we?
We did. I think, well, we should just pick up from wherever we were last time. So, Brian Fox, introduce yourself. Tell us, your background and
Hi.
Sonatype.
Sure, I'm Brian Fox, co-founder and CTO at Sonatype. I'm also on the OpenSSF governing board and the Finos governing board and Singapore Monetary Authority Cyber Board, where I was last week talking about a lot of this stuff. So yeah, that's me. Long background in open source.
You certainly do, and distinguished, and a lot of contributions, which
Thank you.
Definitely appreciate it. Lots of things we could talk about. I'll hold off the AI word if we want to for the moment, but one of my senses in kind of knowing that we've gone through this before, right? Adoption of the cloud, adoption of rolling out things in Kubernetes and in COVID. It's always kind of what do we do about security, sort of the after the fact, and hopefully we're not doing that again, but it kind of feels like in a way we are, is security sort of the secondary thing. It's not off the radar, but it's let's vibe code, let's create agents, let's do all these things, and okay, how are we going to secure it again? JP Morgan Chase CISO issued a letter saying, hey, the industry needs to step up and do more about security. If you were going to write that or you were going to give that talk, what do you think we need to be doing?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I could have written the same letter. I feel like it's the same thing.
That was my first reaction.
Yeah, I've kind of gone through this cyclical thing. Like I felt like 15 years ago the problem was awareness. If we only educated people, they would do better. And that's true to a point, but I think over the last, like I said, 15 years or so, the industry has gotten better, but not better enough, as we've seen with all of the high-profile attacks. SolarWinds, Log4j, all the malicious attacks that we're seeing these days. And so in response, we saw, regulators worldwide stepping in and trying to put their thumb on the scale. And I've kind of been a champion of that over the last handful of years and trying to work to massage that and make sure that those policies are effective and not punitive. We're potentially seeing a backing away from that, that momentum, which is a little frustrating, at least here on the US side. Europe, India, Singapore, they're still pushing hard on that. And I think that's good. And so, the open letter from JPMC is sort of, calling on the industry to do better. My response to that is like, that's great. Also, the industry needs to be able to kind of put their money where their mouth is. The vendors to these large banks will do better if the banks demand it. Mm-hmm. And so it's, asking them to do better, I feel like that's what we've been trying to do forever. So there's two ways you can move that needle. The regulators can force it. The large consumers, banks in this instance, can also force it. That was sort of the process that the US government was taking about sort of mandating S-bombs, mandating attestations, things like that. If these large software acquirers, non-government ones can do it too, if they start demanding the same things, I think it will have the same effect. But they have to band together and do it, and they have to be consistent about it.
Yeah, I almost wonder in part if that letter might have been issued because of the change in direction with CISA. We want you to focus on securing, a national infrastructure, less, I would describe it as less taking a leadership role. I won't put you in a position it's describing it, but it's almost like, okay, now we have to step up in a different way. The large consumers of technology is certainly one approach to that. Any other thoughts of ways we might collaborate, work together to strengthen security as a community?
I think it's those two things that I said. Either the government steps in to force it, which can often be heavy-handed, or ultimately consumers have to demand it. And in this instance, I'm not talking about end user consumers. I'm talking about the large enterprises that are the consumers of software. If they need to demand it as well. Only then will the economics force businesses to prioritize these things in the right way. You and I have spoken about software liability reform and things like that, and that's part of it, because until we can rebalance the economics so that losing data costs more than just buying people their 10th subscription to credit monitoring, until those economics are balanced, we won't see the behaviors change, right? And so there's many ways to balance them, like we've talked about. So I think we need to see that. We're not seeing it enough. And certainly, with the land grab, gold rush, whatever metaphor you want around AI, it's like you touched on in the beginning, is we're seeing a backslide, I think, in that too.
Yeah, I very much sense that of like, we need to get ahead. Every day we're falling behind faster with AI because of the pace that it's moving.
Yeah.
So speaking of AI, someone mentioned at a talk that I was at, well, we won't do anything about security and AI until the first big event happens, sort of the target data breach, the Log4j, you could pick out whatever kind of milestone occurrence that got everybody's attention. You could also argue, well, that could happen very much faster with the pace that AI is moving and how much people are doing vibe coding or agents or using AI in their tools but not securing it properly. Do you follow that too? Are we kind of desensitized to the next big event going to cause anything to change?
There's definitely that element. I mean, I think the desire to keep up and the race for AI is causing people to grab the latest things, without vetting them, right? And so it's like, oh, there's a new model out on Hugging Faces. Let me grab it and give it a shot. And so these are the exact behaviors that lead to dropping of the guard that the malicious actors look for, right? So there's already been cases of copies of models that are put out there that do nefarious things. Now the danger with the AI is that you tend to want to feed it information. So it's a little bit different than just a piece of software that you're running that may or may not have access.
The role of data in it is even
right. Yeah. May or may not have access to lots of your data depending on what you're doing. But that's the main point of the AI. People want to grab these models and kind of feed it all of their data. Well, if that's an untrustworthy piece of software that's hoovering all that data and sending it somewhere, it's even more dangerous than what we've seen. And so we have this interesting collision of people are, dropping their guard, trying to go fast, trying to use the new and novel thing, and not really thinking through all the implications.
Mm-hmm. One of the things I've been thinking about too is one of the differences with AI is since it's code-driven, but it's driven by prompt. And so there's so many more ways of injecting prompts or AI changing its own prompts. I mean, you've got this whole vector in there that can be interjected not just by users, but by code and also other AI systems. So in some ways, we almost need better internal security within AI systems, not just good guardrails, but what happens when AI is generating new and novel things, if you will.
I mean, the power of the AI systems comes from the fact that they're not exactly deterministic, right? That's why they're so useful. They can approximate novel thought, right? But that also makes it impossible to actually thoroughly test all of the things. So where does that leave you? It leaves you in a world of having to depend upon trusting who provided it, trusting the data that went into it, trusting the tuning and all of these things. But we're still in a place where there's not a lot of visibility into that. This is a problem we have in open source. It's why the massive rise of malicious open source is out there, because we don't know who the authors are, even on the popular software that is good, right? They're somewhat anonymous people behind the scenes. And I think, AI is going to force us to rapidly reconcile that, because you can't, in theory, you could take a piece of open source code, you could read it, scan it, do all the things, and get comfortable with the fact that I understand what this is. There's nothing weird in here. But you can't do that with AI. You're talking, petabytes of data that it's been trained on. How do you know if that's been curated to have a specific bias or not? Right. How do you know what the model numbers have been tuned to? Can you really prove it? Right? So it gets to a point where it's impossible to really inspect this. And then you get back to, well, I just have to trust it. I have to trust the people that provided it and all these kinds of things. But we don't quite have that visibility mechanism yet. So I think that's going to push us in that direction pretty rapidly.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe for Sonatype, as AI has risen onto the scene, and I know you're very much forward thinking in your approach to this, how has that changed your product strategy or thinking about AI and models and security?
Yeah, so early on our customers started asking us, how do you help us govern these things, right? So we have a long history of helping organizations detect and govern the open source components that are going into their software. And so from that perspective, AI is just another, albeit large and hard to quantify component, but it is just another component at the end of the day. And so we're seeing a lot of the same patterns that we saw early days, where we'd talk to leaders and they'd say, we don't use open source. And it's like, yes, but you downloaded 100,000 components from us last year. And so it's sort of a case of leaders say you shouldn't do a thing and they assume that that's what's happening. And without the tools to validate and govern it, they can't know that they're wrong, but they're usually wrong. And this is what we saw with open source. And so we added capabilities to our system to be able to detect, provide metadata around the models, and it goes beyond the traditional, security, quality, and licensing that you see in open source, but now we have to think about bias and other kinds of things, derivative models, and is the data, the software license might be one thing, but the data license might be a different thing, and these other types of aspects. So we've had to expand the parameters of metadata that allow them to reason, but the most important thing is being able to discover the AI, right? And so we see a lot of people talking about AI usage, and there's sort of two different pieces to that. There's what the tools are, so think Copilot and other things that are helping you create code on the side, but then what we're seeing and what we're helping them manage is the developers are baking these models into the product,
right,
just like another open source component. And many leaders are focused on the first one and completely missing the second one. And so that's where we've been focused, because our platform and everything else is already kind of designed to be able to manage that problem.
Excellent. Someone said to me yesterday, the pivotal point in their career was when they sort of stopped pitching FUD to the CEO and had to start pitching, and here's the value to the business, why this is important, not just important, but the benefits security brings to the business. If you're going to help one of your colleagues or customers or friends with their pitch around software security, maybe including AI as well, what are some things you'd want to make sure, key points you'd want to help them make?
On their pitch
Pitch to fund software security projects.
Wow.
I know, I saved the easy ones for you. Now I do, I saved the challenging ones because you're the guy to ask.
Yeah, I would think, pitching them to make sure that they have the investment to be able to truly understand what's inside their software from all of the different dimensions. AI, like I explained, is like a whole new, factor with so many new dimensions. So what we see is so many organizations are struggling to deal with just being able to produce something simple like an SBOM for their existing open source. If you can't do that, you're not prepared for all of the malicious components, you're not prepared for the AI components. So I think you need to be thinking about it holistically and not assuming that things are okay, because oftentimes we're finding that they're not. And it's a case of just because you haven't found it doesn't mean it's not there. If I'm from New England, we have radon in our basements, but if you don't have a detector for it, you wouldn't know. It's colorless, odorless, tasteless, you have no idea. Just because you haven't tested for it doesn't mean it's not there. And that's kind of what we're seeing with certainly these AI models that are being baked into software. The developers know. They're the ones that are doing it. It's the leadership who's responsible for knowing they're somewhat unaware of these things. And that is not a good situation.
They're ultimately who's going to get held accountable for
exactly.
it, right?
Right.
Yeah,
they're the ones that are responsible to know. That's right.
Yeah. So last topic, running out of time, we could go hours, What's top of mind? What are things you focusing on for the next 6 months or so? Where are you looking at? What are you researching, thinking about, working on?
Of course, every conversation is like this one around AI and the intersections of it. There's still a lot going on in Europe around, providing the details behind the Cyber Resiliency Act and the product liability directives. The community is working pretty rapidly to try to define what those best practices are, because the regulations say, if you don't follow the best practices, you'll get fined, but it didn't define what those are. We're in that process right now. And a lot of that has to be has to be done in the next 6 months, right? So there's a lot of work going on to to focus on that. We're seeing other countries following suit. India recently released some of their regulations, similar things. So we're seeing a lot going on there, and that's keeping a lot of us in the industry busy to help kind of make sure that the best practices are the right ones, so that the legislation is effective.
Oh, good. Well, maybe even if the U.S. is pulling back or redirecting what it's doing, the international community is not stopping either.
No, they're not. And every significant company is in software is a global company. So these regulations that apply in Europe are going to drive action regardless of where people are headquartered, right? So I think that's at least some of the good news that we're going to see. We're going to see that change no matter what.
Good. Well, thank you. Hey, keep up the good fight, man.
Thank you.
All right, good to be talking here with Brian Fox. Thanks for tuning in. We have some more live interviews coming up here on TechStrong TV, coming to you from RSAC and Broadcast Alley. We'll see you in a minute.